Hey there. Welcome into our On the Ledge feed. I'm Dave Trafford. We will have our regularly scheduled Ontario Politics podcast for you in the next couple of days. But in the meantime, I've been dropping episodes of Now and Next into this feed from time to time. It's my weekly news commentary podcast. Offers made in Canada, independent, unique analysis of the current stories and issues affecting your family, your business, your health, your pocketbook. And in this episode, we feature the bi-weekly visit from our C.A.S.T, our comms and strategy team. We focus on the intersection of leadership, strategy, and the stories behind the story. Hope you enjoy it.
Words matter so much. We saw that at Davos. Actions matter so much. We're seeing it right now.
Well, here we go. And as we record this session of Now and Next, it is February the 17th. So some things may have changed by the time you hear this. And considering the stuff we're going to talk about, it's highly likely. It is our bi-weekly visit from the C.A.S.T team here. It's our comms and strategy team featuring Lindsay Broadhead from Broadhead Communications, Anne-Marie Aikins from AMA Communications, and Bob Reid at Broadway Strategy and Communications. And it's just one of those weeks, Bob, where, boy, at every turn, there seemed to have been one of those things that sort of bubbled up and hit your wheelhouse, the group's wheelhouse, in such a way as that the comms angle on so many stories was the lead on so many of the stories of the week, including, Tumbler Ridge, Metrolinx, and a couple of stories out of Ottawa. And I'm kind of encouraged by that, in as much as people are paying attention to the context. It wasn't always a good story, but they were paying attention to the context and the actual effect of what was being said and how it was being said.
Yeah, usually we have to spend a lot of time kind of chalkboarding things out, from our world view of things, but not so much this week. I think a lot of it was front and center, as you say.
Mm-hmm.
So can we start with Tumbler Ridge? The story broke just after we had hit stop on our last session, and Lindsay, when I hear about this kind of thing happening generally, whether it's here in Canada, in the United States, or whatever, you just you put yourself there and you think, how does anybody cope with the trauma in the aftermath of that? I hear today that British Columbia, the province, is talking about bringing portables into Tumbler Ridge so these kids don't have to go back into the schools. By all accounts, I think that with the exception perhaps of the RCMP, the communications and the media behavior on this story and on this tragedy has been A class. I mean, it's just been a masterclass in terms of how it should have been and, was dealt with.
I would agree. I would only disagree in one regard, and maybe that's your reference to the RCMP. I think the focus on the perpetrator, the young woman who did the shooting, and the transgender element of this has been so disproportionately part of the lead. I really struggle with it, actually, and I think it's a perfect indication of where we are as a community and a larger society on this particular issue. That being said, happy to unpack that more if of interest. But that being said, I agree. The way the first responders, the community leaders, and certainly our political leaders, which I know we'll get to in a second, I think on the whole all dealt with this with such class and appropriateness, and led with the students and community first. Which is part of the 101, right? If you're in crisis comms, if you're going to respond in those first moments and the moments that follow, it's talking about action and speaking with authority so that you're embracing and you're bringing people in rather than risking pushing people out at all. And in that regard, 10 out of 10.
Yeah, Anne-Marie, I thought the Premier was the leader that the British Columbians should have expected and they got in that moment.
Yeah, very much so. I think I was even very impressed with this is a very, very small town. And this is, something that they've never had to deal with before. So you could cut them some slack to say, well, they don't have very much experience in crisis communications. But they were just real and honest and very transparent and led with their emotions and the compassion they had for the community and the regular updates and the reassurance and so forth. And those initial reports didn't mention the anything about the gender of the shooter. People were remarking it's very rare that mass shootings happen with women. It's usually a very much male dominated crime. But the moment I did hear it, I thought, oh, here we go. That's going to be an issue like it is probably led by very much U.S. focused. I remember when there was one of the protesters was, I believe, murdered, the woman. They kept referring to her in the U.S. as the gay protester, the lesbian protester, like that had anything to do with why she was shot. But I digress. I think the initial crisis comms was spot on, as Lindsay said. It was very, very good. Began the process of healing with the community. But then the political responses has just been outstanding, and I think is really going to change the image of especially the opposition leader is I don't know how he returns to who he was before, because this was a very different leader we saw that day when the Prime Minister and the opposition leaders gathered to mourn.
Yeah, Bob, the in the moment response after it was apparent that the school was in lockdown, there was an active shooter at the school, et cetera, and I know that will all be analyzed over and over again in terms of best practices and what could we have done better in terms of the response, and I'll come back to my complaint about the RCMP, but the way the local community, the authorities, just generally responded to that, against the backdrop of that, recalling what happened at Walkerton when, the local municipality was trying to stick handle the water disaster in Walkerton, 20 odd years ago. To me, that's what immediately came to mind. And I'm sorry if I trigger you when we talk about that, but it's the kind of thing where you would think by now that everybody would have had a playbook that said, here's how we deal with this, as difficult as it may be.
Well, there is one, I suppose. I don't know that anybody's written it down, but it's an unfortunate fact of life in this day and age, I suppose, that there is an awareness among people in comms roles, whether that is the first responders or the political level, the folks of the town. There's kind of a way that we've learned to do these things, as sad as that is. And some do better than others, if I could be so crass to put it in those terms, because it's just such a horrific thing that the people of that community are going to go through for years and years and years and years. We're at the hard part for them now, where the cameras have pretty much gone home, and it's starting to fade again, but the hurt doesn't. And in the moment, I was just so impressed, pretty much all the way around, by the way it was handled, and the dignity and the gentleness. I mean, that image of Mark Carney and Pierre Poilievre and the Governor General holding hands together is going to be one for the ages. And it's one that has resonated so strongly with people and reinforced what we saw a lot of during the COVID pandemic, frankly, where partisan lines disappeared. People in high offices, regardless of stripe, just worked together to try and cope with the situation at hand. And that's what we saw in Tumbler Ridge. And just the grace, to use a word that Poilievre used several times in his remarks all the way around, was touching and inspiring and encouraging, I think, to so many watching.
I want to come back to that in a second, but Lindsay, to my point on the RCMP, I don't necessarily think that it had anything. My criticism is not about the transgender issue or identifying the shooter one way or the other. I think that where they failed was in communicating with the families and with the community on the ground in terms of where they were with it. There were people who hadn't heard from the RCMP for 12 hours after that shooting. That's unconscionable. And I hearken back. I talked to Keith Leslie last week, and Keith lives in Antigonish now, and he was the former Queen's Park bureau chief for CP, but he was down in Nova Scotia when the mass shooting happened there. And the RCMP, I realize it's a completely different dynamic, but the RCMP screwed that pooch as well in terms of how they were communicating the story and the crisis at the time on the ground, and they have learned nothing.
Which is funny because I can't speak for BC schools or Nova Scotia schools, but certainly in Ontario, TDSB does regular, it's horrible, but shutdown practice with the kids, just like what we used to do with fire drills, etc. This is sadly part of what they learn. And it is part of I'll call it their curriculum, because that's what they're practicing. So to Bob's point, there is a playbook. And any business, like I'm in a tower right now, all of these towers would have shutdown rules. They would know what to do at hospitals, for example, would be a very common space. So I don't know how much of this has to do with what we don't know on the ground and the complications of what happened on the ground. I'm always willing to give quite a bit of rope in moments like this, because the sheer number of things people are dealing with and handling and the unknowns is huge. That being said, to your point, there is zero excuse in terms of not having the resources available in Canada. You ship them in, you bring them in for something like this. Our Prime Minister canceled his trip. The RCMP needs to bring in more resource if that's what's required to ensure that the families, the community have the supports they need, have the information they need, and are being communicated with in a way that victims understand why they're not being communicated, because there could be very good reasons for both, right? So it's a case that needs to be broken down, because sadly, like there was another shooting in the U.S. Involving at a hockey arena, I believe. This is now becoming status quo in North America. And the only way we're going to cease it is to have the mechanisms up place to respond quicker and ensure that the overall damage is brought to a minimum right from the get-go.
Yeah, just for the record on that point, it was the 55th mass shooting in the United States so far in 2026. I'm just saying, we're shocked by it because it's happened so irregularly. That story in Pawtucket kind of hit and went, and it's not even making headlines or on the lower third on the national news. Bob?
Yeah, just a point of interest. They did actually practice at the Tumbler Ridge School. They did do drills, and I know this because I watched Premier David Eby's speech. And if folks have not seen that aspect of the remarks that were made by political leaders at the memorial, search it out. It was a tremendously powerful speech. He had no notes whatsoever and just told the story of one teacher and the actions he took and how he helped his kids. And his own son had left the classroom to go to the washroom when the shooting took place and as they became aware of what was happening. And this teacher made the decision to jam a chair in the door as is the procedure, to protect the kids in the classroom, knowing his own son was out there somewhere. It was just such a powerful moment, and David Eby rose to it again with such grace. It was a wonderful bit of oratory. So people should check that out if they haven't.
All right, so we all agree that they all struck the right tone. They said the right words. They had the right approach to it. There was no emotional manipulation, no thoughts and prayers, kind of nonsense. Anne-Marie, was my exercise after I heard our political leaders, the federal leaders, speak. I went back to the text, and I read the text of what they had to say. And then I imagined it being spoken by Justin Trudeau. And I can hear him saying it. Now, what if it had been Justin Trudeau? I don't think that what Carney said in Trudeau's voice, what Poilievre said in Trudeau's voice, would have resonated with Canadians the same way.
Well, it may have 15 years ago, but I think just towards the end when he came, when he spoke very passionately about very difficult subjects, there was I'm going to speak very personally, I felt like it was more about him than about everyone else. And it's a hard thing to articulate, but it may have been getting his own delivery of his communications. I think towards the end, when it became more and more difficult to be prime minister, he may have gone there in his own head when he would have to deliver difficult subjects. At least that's the feeling that I got. He was speaking about himself rather than reaching out to all of the other people that were hurting. And I think both Poilievre and Carney and all of the other speakers, it was all about the people that were hurting. And
Reid,
not that they weren't feeling it though, because you could see the emotion just dripping from them, but it was about the other people. Go, Lisa.
Well, no, and I'm sorry to interrupt. It's just you're hitting such an important chord. And I don't know if you guys read this article, and I can't believe I'm going to quote George W. But his article that came out celebrating George Washington in the last couple of days, and it was titled, and it was clearly a subtle, not so subtle guidance call, perhaps, to the current president of the United States. But it's called, "For a Leader, Humility is the Ultimate Strength," right? And I think that's exactly what you're talking about, is that when a character, be it a premier, a prime minister, a business leader, whomever, sticks to a podium, they're bringing their whole self there. It's about all the subtleties, tone. How do you say I or we? Right? Who do you talk about first? And I think you're right. Like Trudeau towards the end was it. Did he say the word we? I'm not certain. He certainly didn't in terms of how we heard him speak. Yeah. And that is the ultimate guide. But I think you're totally hitting a nail on the head there.
So if I were to say to you, Bob, and this is a quote, "The world is changing very fast right in front of us. The old world is gone. We live in a new era of geopolitics, and it's going to require all of us to re-examine what that looks like and what our role is going to be." Who would you attribute that to?
Well, I believe it's Carney from Davos. But to your point, that's the difference between message and messenger. And the two don't always necessarily work together. There is very much a human element dependence on whether the messenger can really credibly and resonantly deliver the message. So on this discussion of what if Trudeau had said it, he became a flawed messenger at a point where people just did not take at face value the words that he was putting across. The messaging could have been bang on, and in some cases it was, but the messenger became the problem.
So let me make the point. That was Marco Rubio.
Ah,
right?
Wow.
So, right
There you go.
And well, so I saw this when he got off the plane in Germany. And
What's
he
going
made this
on this
speech the tarmac.
podcast? Our host is asking us gotcha questions. Hold on. Hold on.
But my point is that nobody believed Rubio when he said it, but they believed Carney when he said it. And in fact, they said, I guess Carney was right all along. It was really interesting to see how the point around the message was getting lost because of the messenger, Lindsay.
Yeah. Well, and we've seen it so wonderfully. Like, I was wondering for a hot second if that was Reagan, actually. And like, I thought of, the Doug Ford ad, as well. Like, we're in this funny moment where the things have been said. It's now what you do. And who's saying it to, Anne-Marie and Bob's point, right? And what we're getting at is, words matter so much. We saw that at Davos. Actions matter so much. We're seeing it right now. Who delivers them, how they're delivered, the way you connect with your audience. You know, it's how Anne-Marie said it was messy and it was emotional in those first moments. That's exactly right for some crisis, right? You can't be so surgical sometimes. It has to be true and authentic and all those horrible words that we don't like anymore. But there's an element of truth in that. So we've heard the speeches so many times in our lifetime. It's now what you do to wrap around them. Do you hold hands with your enemies, right? Quite literally. And are you able to cross the floor in moments when it matters, or do you release? And some of the leaders right now will never hold hands, right? And ours did. And that's a moment of huge national pride because it's action. And it means that those tears, those closed eyes, those words were true.
Mm-hmm. So, Bob, I want to come back to something that Anne-Marie said about, the messaging that came out of Tumbler Ridge vis-a-vis Pierre Poilievre. And I thought she nailed it with the question, can he actually go back to the way he was, or will he go back to the way he was, or can he actually maintain this level of eye contact authenticity that he seems to have managed at the vigil?
It could be a wholly unanticipated opportunity for Pierre Poilievre because there have been countless calls and from many close to him saying, you got to change your tone, dude. You got to soften the edges a bit. You've got to not be that guy all the time that you've been all the time for as long as you've been that guy. And look how surprised everybody was to see what I think was a very real, genuine look at Pierre Poilievre. He wasn't putting on an act at all, but we're so not used to that it was so surprising to see how gracious he could be, how emotional he could get about a situation. So if I were going to be really crass about things, I would say, you've been handed a chance. You've been handed a pivot point that nobody was expecting, but it came along. You can now take advantage of that. You can stay not wholly in that mode, but you can now pivot. You can now tack away, and it will appear consistent with that and with who you really are that people don't know potentially.
Yeah, Anne-Marie, I think where Lindsay talked about holding hands with your enemies, at least at this point, we understand that they're not necessarily enemies, adversaries perhaps, but there's been a shift, not just in his tone. It's connected in terms of a shift in the relationship among the folks on the Hill.
I think it's exactly right, but I'm not as positive that this will increase his popularity. I think the polls, I think his popularity was so tied into this, combative character that many on the very far right really like, go after him and be tough and, to hell with telling the complete honest truth out there, just spread stuff. I don't know if he can really authentically carry it off. I think it's going to depend on the polls. If the polls come back, if he stays this course and plays much more, fair in the sandbox, and his poll numbers go way down, then I think he'll go back to exactly the way he was. He's just going to have to. He's going to wait some time, though. It's too soon after Tumbler Ridge to just go right back to who he was.
Well, I don't want to get into the early election speculation, Lindsay, but I had this conversation with Tim Hudak a couple of weeks ago, just in terms of what does it mean when the prime minister is out polling his party, and the party is out polling the Conservatives, the Liberals, that is, and Tim said, Hudak said that Poilievre just kind of has to hold the course, but the only way that he is going to actually leap over Carney is if Carney stumbles. So it's an interesting play there in terms of how you finesse the communication strategy around waiting for a guy like Carney to stumble, and he seems to have a lot of runway that's flat.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I'll go. I did not hear the full interview with you and Tim, so I don't want to take your summary as the standalone. I don't know if "hold the course" is the right counsel. So I'll attribute that just to our conversation and not to Tim. If right now he faces a kind of an intellectual disconnect, he needs to bring in narrative around Trump and Canadian sovereignty and bringing together Canada with who his tent includes, which are the separatists, which are pro-Trumpians, and which are those who are quite aggressively claiming that Carney isn't moving on files. So I'm not going to judge whether any of those points of view are correct or incorrect. It's just they're not compatible as a leader to bridge those two spaces unless there's something that unites them. So hold the course is a plan of hope. And we all know what happens with plan of hope, right? Nothing good, and certainly nothing planned. There has to be something that ties where he wants to take the party with the direction of Canada, and something that can bring us all together. So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question or tying to Tim's remarks correctly. But I think Poilievre has to seize. We're touching on a lot of elements here that have been talked about since the federal election, right? Which is his personality and how he presents rubs certain cohorts that are meaningful voters the wrong way. And he hasn't shifted those. So when you look at women, when you look at kind of older age conservative men who would typically vote for the party, they're not anymore. So what do you do? He has great element of strength in the youth vote, so that there's endless potential there. But he also has a troubling caucus, right? The Jamil Javani actions that happened in the last week too, since we last spoke. Like, these are all very complicated, confusing, unconnected messages. There needs to be more uniform approach in how he drives his strategy now.
Yeah, just on Jamil Javani, Bob, I read a story on Breitbart that featured an interview with Javani, and it rung all the bells that we would expect in terms of his trip down to Washington. And he was complaining about Canada's hissy fit, anti-American hissy fit. Okay, I get it. But at the end of the interview, they asked Javani about his university and college tour, a la Charlie Kirk, and the quotation in the story and from the podcast was he called Kirk the great Charlie Kirk. So I think it's one of those things where he kind of drove a nail into his own foot there, and inadvertently, whether that is the kind of thing that's going to come up and go back to the Poilievre messaging. Yeah.
I thought he also misplayed when he got to Washington. He posted a very high level, high-minded comment about how he's here to meet and to learn and to talk about Canada and the U.S. and can't wait to get back and share his findings with the Prime Minister and the Trade Minister and all of that. And then as soon as he got back, he published a op-ed in the National Post that ripped the prime minister for not being able to get a deal with the U.S. and look how much progress Mexico's making and we're getting left behind. So immediately the actions put paid to that hopeful message that was coming out front. So yeah, I mean, he has done that several times, as you say, where he's driven his own nails, and he's got to watch out.
I want to turn to the Metrolinx story of the month, and back, I guess it was the beginning of February, early in the day, there was a derailment at Union Station, and it caused all kinds of chaos for better part of the week that week in terms of getting trains in and out. It affected 6 or 7 lines. Anne-Marie, you will know better than I do, but it affected almost the entire system as far as the rail service was concerned. And I remember hearing about the story at like 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I'm in the car, and they're on about it. And Jim Richards is on the radio taking calls, and he's just got irate users of the GO service, and particularly the trains, who were talking about how they had to get off the train and then get on a bus, and then they had to tap twice and they didn't get a refund. And then they had all kinds of examples about that. It was a mess. It was just a nightmare. And then at some point I realized this had happened 8 hours ago, and still there was no clarity around what the hell happened. What was plan B in any of this? It was a disaster.
Yeah. Yeah, I watched with great interest, obviously. Who would have thought the biggest communication story for Metrolinx that month had nothing to do with the Eglinton Crosstown. And it opened, and it seems to be doing well. So that's a good news story. But I watched because when I first joined Metrolinx 100 years ago, there was these old notions in the rail industry is that you don't say the scary words. So scary words are like derailment, because that conjures up an image of derailments that we know about that have caused catastrophic damage and injuries.
Spain, a couple of months ago, right?
Oh, exactly, yeah. Right? Yeah. And so you avoid bad words. You avoided talking about when people died by suicide on rails. You just avoid the bad words because it scares people. So I think one of the things I had an impact on was I was able to help them understand that how to speak to our customers like they were the adults in the room and that they could appreciate it. And there are ways to communicate scary stuff in a way that they can understand and won't overreact. So it was trusting customers. So when the news first came out, I heard about a signal problem, and it was right in Union Station, and that it was causing all this disruption. But my experience told me it's got to be more than this signal problem right in Union Station corridor to be causing this much havoc. Then I heard it was a disabled train, and it wasn't until video evidence came out from many other people that it was a derailment. And it was a derailment where wheels came off the track, and yes, they broke signals when they came off the track, and they broke the track themselves. And so, yes, there was a disabled train. So all of those pieces were true, but they were avoiding the word derailment until there was video evidence and everyone kept calling it a derailment. You could see the train was off the tracks. And I thought, that's going to hurt them. Why are you doing that now? And I went through all those things in my head. And then I thought, well, surely they'll put somebody out there to help explain to customers the impact, because my knowledge knew it was going to impact a lot of different lines. It was in the track right beside Up Express, so people can't fix things unless you clear all of those tracks. So it impacted everything, and it impacted it for the better part of the week, and still no one was speaking to it. No one was on camera. People were remarking how, Jerry Agar was going on and on about he was going to call Anne-Marie to get here because she would have gotten here to talk to me about this. So I just felt terrible for them that it was being unnecessarily managed in the way that it was, with the opaqueness and the lack of transparency and the lack of compassion, I thought, for customers. But then fast forward a week later, Metrolinx had promised an investigation, and I thought, oh, who knows whenever I'll hear about that. But a week later, at the board meeting, right in front of cameras, the new CEO, Michael Lindsay, told the absolute truth. He said there were screws loose or screws missing or something on the track, and that's why it was derailed. This is the action that he took. This was how they were going to make it better for customers. I was gobsmacked because I thought, what's changed? Why suddenly this transparency and the compassion? And he did a great job. Everything you would have wanted earlier on in this unnecessarily long crisis. So it made me wonder, what's changed? Has he been given, the purse, the strings that are attached to the province loosened a bit for him? And I hope so. And I hope it stays that way because it will serve them well in the end.
Two things on that, though, Bob. First is, we go back to this accusation, and it's long-standing, and maybe the reason why Phil Verster actually took the exit package, because there was such pressure from political offices to say, don't say anything, in particular, not necessarily about Union Station, but we know the Eglinton Crosstown. Reputationally, the Metrolinx will never crawl out from underneath that one. But at the heart of it was always the transparency, the lack of communication, the lack of, accountability on terms of why things are happening so slowly. So, yes, maybe Michael Lindsay made a pivot, but I'm not sure this saves Metrolinx reputationally.
It's astonishing that this requires this kind of analysis and discussion when really what we're talking about here is, as Anne-Marie said, be honest with people, be transparent with people, and they will understand the situation better. I mean, communication doesn't get any more simpler than that, treat them like the adults in the room. Tell them what has happened. And back to the genesis of the derailment problem. When you hear things like signal problem or switch problem or something that sounds minor like that, your reaction is, well, get the damn thing fixed and get the trains running again. What is wrong with you idiots? Why can't you run a railroad properly? When you saw the train was off the track and you saw the damage that had been caused, then suddenly it was like, well, that's a mess, and that won't be an easy fix. This is going to take a long time. Had they led with that out of the gate and managed people's expectations accordingly, they would have been in such a stronger position thanks to that transparency and just telling it like it was. Because when you get into the euphemisms that are open to interpretation, the interpretation can go a million different ways and probably not the way you want.
Yeah, well, Lindsay, the other part of this story for me is, and when I go back to our conversation vis-a-vis Tumbler Ridge, what was Plan B? Surely there has to be some kind of, okay, this has happened. In the worst case scenario, if all of this happened and we had no trains, what would we do? That has to be a scenario that you play out at some point, considering the complexity of the GO network. There wasn't even that. People were told, oh, just show up and see if your bus shows up.
Well, look, Anne-Marie can tell you there is a plan, right? There are multiple plans. And you know who knows transit really well is folks who live in the GTA. Why? Because they've been riding the damn thing. They've been delayed. They've been taken on all these emotional journeys for over a decade. They know all of this stuff and they can call BS in advance of anyone. I don't know. Bob and Anne-Marie have hit it out of the park in terms of what you should do. The only thing I'll add is CEO communications is really an interesting, delicate beast, especially for an organization like this. I dig Michael Lindsay. I think he is smart. I think he's articulate. I think he is a stark contrast from the previous leadership that was not strong in the ways that we deserved. My curiosity there, in addition to the question that Anne-Marie asked, something's afoot. There's something happening behind the scenes, and permissions are being given. The challenge that Michael Lindsay has is he's been in the foreground on a number of different communications that have been of far less consequence, right? He's posted wonderful videos and images from his office late at night, shining down on concerts, or where there's been traffic, or where there's been congestion, or where there's been moments where, his organization has helped. And he's been very forthright on what I'll call things of not much consequence, right? Really interesting brand building. They have to be careful, because when you use your CEO, you need to roll them out when there are moments of consequence. And when there's a derailment that disrupts the entire system, that is what that is. That is a moment of consequence when your CEO should be speaking and should be being proactive. And it presents a stark contrast when it's not like he's a CEO that's rarely out and then he was out a week later, as Anne-Marie described. This is a CEO that's out quite a bit. There's an absence there, and that absence is notable to those who follow it. So that's kind of my only, I think, addition to this piece.
Yeah, as you speak, I think of, how Andy Byford would have handled things had he been at the helm. And you go back to, it didn't matter if there was, a shutdown of the young subway line on a commute in the morning. You knew Andy Byford was going to be there with his vest on, helping people get onto buses. And it wasn't necessarily fixing the problem, but you're right. I mean, you need to be visible. That's as much an important part of the comms strategy as the words that come out of your mouth.
Yeah, but also Brad Ross it wouldn't always be Andy. It would be Brad Ross, or it would be
somebody.
Other people, there would always be a presence out there. And that I totally agree with you, Lindsay. You got to really be strategic about when you put your CEO out there. If he's out there all of the time on all of the minor things, then you start to think they're bigger because the CEO's speaking. But you need to have a presence out there, and they just don't seem to have one now that's available to jump on CP24 and the radio stations and just explain it to people regularly as this crisis of sorts progresses and changes and updates are needed and so forth. It just provides reassurance, information, and understanding that this is, a shitty situation and customers are feeling it. It's screwing up their getting to work or getting to their doctor's appointments. It's just an appreciation for that, though. And I, too, Michael Lindsay is a completely different person than Phil Verster, completely different. He's much more approachable, and this suited him. He was believable, and and it was a relief to see it. And the news about that derailment ended at that moment. We never talked about it again after that, because we didn't need
It's a wonderful case study in just operational communications. There was no crisis here. No one died. There was no injury. It was a mass disruption of a network. Horrible, not a crisis.
Yeah, nobody ever said it at any point there. By the way, the train derailed, but everybody is okay. We got them all out of the train safely. No one was hurt. Nobody said that message.
Well, here's the other part of this, though, and it's the deeper dive that we learned from the board meeting, and when Michael Lindsay was making his presentation, was that Toronto Terminals Railway is the company that's supposed to be doing the maintenance. Clearly, they have not been doing the maintenance with any rigor. If it was obvious that this many bolts were missing from the tracks at significant spots, so it does go deeper. And if in fact it's being ignored at that level, again, not to sort of overhype it, but it could have been worse, because it could have happened somewhere else on the tracks at speed. So I just, good for him for actually getting out and showing us where the bolts were missing, and he got down to the 1 1/8 inch or whatever it was.
Screws loose is not a good headline that you want.
No, it's not.
For all the reasons.
When's somebody going to say screws loose?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's finish with some fun from Ottawa. And we know that Michael Lindsay, before he was at Metrolinx, was at Infrastructure Ontario, and he succeeded a guy named Aaron Corey. Aaron, in my experience, smart guy, gets it. He was involved in a lot of the P3 projects that the province undertook under the Wynne and Dalton McGuinty governments. just a really a clever guy. He moved on to the Canada Infrastructure Bank maybe 3 years ago. He was in front of the Finance Committee this week. I guess it was the 12th of February. So, just doing what appeared to have been a fairly routine visit. And Sandra Kubina is the MP from Newmarket Aurora. She's on the committee. And so she just had a basic question for him.
Mr. Corey, as you know, both of us work for Canadians and taxpayers. Could you kindly share with Canadians what your compensation is?
That's a fair and transparent question.
Sorry, go ahead.
That, by the way, was her phone answering her question. So I'm not sure that was ideal, but they got back on track. She turned the phone off and asked the question again, and Aaron Corey answered the question.
Compensation at the CIB is published annually in our annual report. All of our executive compensation is published. We're very transparent, and so I'm happy to share afterwards with the member all of our compensation if it's so desired.
How much did you get compensated last year in the last fiscal year? Base salary and bonus?
My compensation is open and transparent, and it's published on the internet.
Just the number, if you can. It is a public number, public information. I have the number, but I'd like you to just share with us.
My compensation is set by our board every year. They benchmark against the public markets, and they pay me well in range of what CEOs are paid in other parts of the world. Okay.
Mr. Corey, could you share with Canadians what your compensation is?
Madam Chair, thank you for the question. As said, my compensation is public. It's benchmarked Corey, every year by our board and set.
Mr.
And
Corey,
I agree, I work for taxpayers.
I'm sorry, I have to ask you, why are you refusing to share your compensation? It is taxpayers' money that contributes to your compensation. They deserve to know, so can you please share with them?
My compensation is a matter of public record, and I take my duty as a worker for taxpayers seriously.
Your compensation is in the range of $553,000 and $651,000, and you are entitled to an incentive, a bonus, of 50% of your base. So you could be making around $1 million. Could you justify that? What metric justifies that level of compensation for someone who is working in the public sector?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. I am, as the questioner points out, as the member points out, I've worked in public service both at the provincial and federal level
increasingly
for about
painful.
years.
And I apologize to the audience for kind of having you sit through that, but it went on and on and on, and there was no real answer there at all, Bob. And I thought, for a pretty smart guy who could have probably answered that question right away, or should have probably answered it right away, moved on, and when asked about, is it, money well spent, his answer simply should have been, hey, listen, the board makes that decision. They make that recommendation to Parliament. Parliament votes on it, and it is as it is. You should probably direct that question to them. And it's moved on. This has become a crazy meme on YouTube as a result. It's talk about an own goal.
Well, I had a similar reaction at first. Just answer the damn question, because she's got the numbers. She says, I have the record right here in front of me. So I actually think, given that binary choice, he probably made the right one, because he knew he was being rhetorically painted into a corner. He knew she was going to come out with numbers anyway. As he said, the number is a matter of public record. What he was deliberately doing was not giving up the clip. No matter how hard you try, no matter what you do, you're not going to get a clip of me stating what my salary is, because it's a big number and because I'm not going to be the one doing it. I know you're going to do it, so I'm just going to let you go there and I'll play the game. It was sort of like the old McCarthy here, or not McCarthy, Bobby Kennedy, when he was Attorney General, questioning the mob bosses under oath, and it was an endless game of taking the fifth. I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to say it. I don't have to, so I won't. So back to you. Yeah, it's a cat and mouse game, and it's kind of BS politics, but given the choice, he decided, no way in hell am I giving up the clip, and he stuck to it. So good for him.
Yeah, I'm not convinced of the strategy, Anne-Marie.
No.
Yeah, I don't agree either. I think because what's the clip? It's this clip where he sounds like he's in a witness protection program or something. Like it's like he's like somebody's going to do something if he says whatever he's going to say. So the clip is even more damning. And the money comes out anyway. So I think I agree with you, Dave. Just give the money and defend it the way you said exactly that. They decided, including Parliament, that it was fair compensation, and so ask them.
Well, either way, there's an outrage element to this, Lindsay, that he has to sort of choose between. I get Bob's point, but I don't know whether or not it would have been as explosive on YouTube if he had just said, "This is it," and ask the board.
Yeah, and we'll never know. It's so funny. Like, that clip is right out of media training, though, isn't it? When you ask your client to stick to the message, and it's hard to stick to the message without sounding like a robot and repeating the same thing. And that must have felt like an hour for him, even as it felt long for us. I think I'm somewhere to the side of this conversation. This is, again, about character in one light. You started off the top, like a really strong CEO, a strong leader who's demonstrated his creds in the market. This was someone in a parliamentary proceedings recorded session saying exactly what we heard. I have the number, but I want you to share it with us, right? She gave away the game so overtly that I actually find it silly in many ways, but also gross. Bob said he dodged the clip, and that's what he dodged. Like, when we look at the House speaking, what they're doing back and forth and what politicians post afterwards are the clips, right? The clips of themselves sounding smart, or the clips of the opponents sounding less than. So the calculus that he struck was, I think it's going to be better not to have the clip than to, I doubt he imagined this necessarily, but then to be, is it trust on the other side of the clip? I'm someone who can be trusted. Therefore, this clip matters more to me that I don't have it. That was the calculus. I can't say if it's right or wrong because I don't know enough what's behind the curtain or they're dealing with there. So I'm going to assume that the decision tree that led them to that gave them that confidence. That being said, I think if you are part of a taxpayer institution, I think you have to just give the clip, sadly. Again, I say that without knowing the calculus. There's nothing to hide. Every CEO fears the sunshine list every year. We need to pay our CEOs more, not less, because they're good. If they're in that spot, they should be good. And if they're not, they should be fired. And that's as simple as it is.
Well, here's the one thing where I think his strategy might have backfired a little bit more, because all of a sudden, rather than talking about his compensation, Bob, he was talking about the efficacy and the value of the Canada Infrastructure Bank. And I think that's a far thornier issue in terms of convincing Canadians that we're getting money for value from the Canadian Infrastructure Bank. But
that is his job. Is to convince us that we're getting value for money from it, and that it's an important organization that does important work. So he's got to go there on that. He's got to play defense on that.
Yeah, well, again, it's just I think that given our conversation around transparency and authenticity, it was a real struggle. And this is, let's face it, this is where most of the fire happens on Parliament Hill, is in the committees. It's question period ain't question period. It's not answer period. It's just, a lot of performative stuff that goes on in the legislature. Let's leave it there, shall we? And we'll come back in a couple of weeks, and I expect there'll be no shortage of things to talk about. Bob Reid, Anne-Marie Aikins, Lindsay Broadhead, thanks for being here. It's Now and Next. They are the CA.S.T, the comms and strategy team. I'm Dave Trafford, and this is Now and Next. Enjoy your week.
Pay no attention to that man behind the curtain.